TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the planet. It's your friendly neighborhood philosopher here, D. Wood. And with me now, I've got Christopher Gasson. Hey, how you doing, Chris?
Hi, great to meet you.
Do you go by Chris or Christopher?
Tend to be Christopher.
Christopher. All right, we will keep it the formal Christopher there. Sorry about that.
Christopher.
Now, we want to get to a study that you were behind, which shows some interesting things. And I had mentioned to you just yesterday in an email that there was a completely different study in the U.S., but showed something quite similar. But as far as your study, you came out with a book that sort of led into that study. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your new book first?
So I published this book. It's called The Devil's Gospels, Finding God in Four Great Atheist Writers. I guess it's about doing a bit of jujitsu on atheism, using the strength of their arguments to build a better case for God. And it came out actually of a Sunday school I used to run at Oxford's University Church, where I felt that the young people didn't want to engage with sort of more Bible stories. They really wanted to understand the sort of the objections to Christianity that they were finding at school and in the big bad world out there. So, each month I'd bring in a different atheist book and we'd discuss it. And actually, I found it quite inspirational. I think they did too. And it was quite a sort of fun exercise to sort of see how actually, I guess this is the way that God works. That actually even atheists are sort of bent to His will, and it was an interesting thing. And I thought, well, other people would be interested in this, so I published the book. But when I published the book, I thought it'd be interesting to really understand the situation with sort of belief and atheism in Britain. And, I had sort of assumed that the narrative that we were following was that, basically old people were the most religious and young people were the most atheist. And that, what I was hoping was that, I'd show that there's a great market for my book among all these young atheists. But it turned out the opposite. Probably... young people, first of all, they're much more spiritual than older people, and they're also more religious. And atheism peaks around people sort of my sort of age, in their 50s. That very much surprised me. But it sort of makes sense. I think that this sort of grand narrative that, the atheists have been sort of putting forward, that, we're moving from sort of, dark pagan beliefs to the sort of lightness of rationality is actually just not the case. That, God is never going to go away. There is this sort of instinct that we're sort of born with. That is this sort of spiritual thing, which is sort of expressed in different ways. And certainly, a lot of us find the best expression of that in Christianity.
Now, you mentioned what you were kind of expecting, which is exactly what I would have expected you to find. Namely, that if you go out and actually count the numbers, you're going to find that old people are the most Christian, or the most likely to believe in God. And then, people in their 30s or something like that, they're going to be more atheists among them. And that if you go to the young people, you're going to find the biggest atheists of all.
Yeah,
because that just seemed like the trend in recent years. And then you came out with your study, and as you pointed out, showed something very, very, very different. And we're going to go ahead and look through some of that study. But before we move on from your book, you want to share what the books that you address are?
Well, I mean, the four sort of atheist sort of Gospels. The first one is Thus Spake Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche, which, that's famous for the sort of God is dead thing. The next one's much more obscure, but it's very relevant to sort of scripture-based religion, and that's Jacques Derrida's Writing and Difference. If you're having a God which primarily comes out of scripture, you have to ask this question of, how can you actually find God in words when words are so slippery? And then the third one was Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, which, although he famously says at the end of it, we may learn the mind of God, he doesn't mean that at all. What he's trying to say is we can come up with an explanation of the beginning of time which doesn't involve a creator. And the fourth one is that, Richard Dawkins' famous God delusion, which I think has probably been the most effective atheist challenge to religion published in the last sort of 30 years. But I think in all of them, I think you can find inspiration for God, which is what one would expect, actually. I mean, as I say, I worship at the University Church here in Oxford, and that was sort of founded in the sort of 1400s, really as the center of the university. And, the Sunday school I ran would actually met in the original university library. And when they founded the university, they took this view that, everything that you could learn about the world was telling you more about God. And I think that we have to have that same attitude today, that all science, all the humanities, even atheism, is actually telling us more about God. And I feel that is really the message of the book.
It is. Have to say, it is interesting hearing the God delusion included among works by Nietzsche and Derrida and so on. But it is interesting in that the.
I mean, do you think God's afraid of these books?
No. It was interesting to me. It was interesting to me, including Richard Dawkins among some great philosophical works there.
Yeah, I know.
But it's odd. It's
in lots of different ways.
Yeah, and it's odd. It's odd that you've got philosophers cracking away at topics for many years, and then but Richard Dawkins will be the most popular.
Yeah.
Wild stuff. All right, so you then I guess commissioned a study on religious belief for different age groups and so on. I think you said 10,000 people when I took a look at it. I did want to, because this just came out yesterday. This let's see, did this come out yesterday? This is when I saw it. Let me see. Come on, when's your article written? Oh, the 26th. Yeah, that was yesterday. So this came out from the New York Times yesterday. Just wanted to pop this on the screen real quick just to show that something similar is at work elsewhere as well. But this from the New York Times just yesterday, Christianity's decline in U.S. appears to have halted, major study shows. And then one of the reasons they're giving for this, we have here, young people contributed to the shift. If you're a young white male these days and you think of yourself as conservative, then being religious is a part of that. So they're connecting it to political trends. But what I wanted to take a look at was down here, this chart. So we can see, everyone, you've got, so this is the decline of Christianity in the U.S. may have stopped. Downward trend started to slow around 2019. So you've got this going back to 2007, and you'll notice that the number of people who identify as Christian is close to 80%, just going back fewer than 2 decades. And that number slowly declines. Over time. And so what do we got here? 78%, 77, 76, 75, keeps dropping. Then we have a big drop right around 2018. So it goes from 67 down to 63. And then after that, though, so after 2019, then there's a little jump, and then the trend continues downward. And then for the past couple years, there's been an increase. So it bottomed out at 60% of people identifying as Christian, and then 62%, and now 63% as of 2024. And then over here, of course, we have the religiously unaffiliated, and that was just 16% in 2007. And that slowly increases. So it goes to 19, 20, 24, 25, 28, all the way up to 30 there. So basically doubles. And then interestingly, now it's leveling off and dropping off a bit. So it goes from 31 to 28 to 29 to 28, but is not increasing as we saw for basically 2 decades. So pretty interesting stuff there. And I found it interesting just because you guys had sent me your study from the UK. And even though they're talking about different reasons and so on, very similar results that I would not have expected if you had asked me what's going on. Now, I was expecting it in the future because I was expecting the sort of new atheism to be bottoming out. I started sensing it a couple of years ago when it was almost like they'd made all their predictions back in the early 2000s, and it was, hey, if we just get millions of people to leave Christianity, then, we're going to become more scientific and more enlightened, and we're going to get smarter, and everything's going to get better, and the world's going to get better, and then everyone's going to see it, and then more people are going to want to become atheists because they see that atheism is doing everything better. And it was almost put forward like that, like, hey, join us, and the world's going to become a better place. And well, you've had a couple of decades of that now. Millions of young people became atheists over that time. And how has the world been improving at all? Which of your predictions has come true? And as far as I can tell, none of them. Like nothing. I haven't seen any noticeable way in that the world is better over these 20 years of the new atheism. I still can't figure out. And I asked this, and I still haven't seen any way that the world has improved by all these people becoming atheist. And I think other people are sort of getting the same vibe. Like what you guys said was going to happen just didn't happen. Nothing got better. In fact, if anything, it looks like things are getting worse. So how's that work? And so I think lots of people are in that situation. Anyway, a couple months ago, I made a video titled something like The Future of Atheism. And I don't know if you want to give your age, Christopher, but what sort of realm are you in?
I'm 58, which I think is sort of peak age for atheism.
Oh, yeah, nice, very nice, very nice. Yeah, so I'm 49, but you're old enough to remember atheists and atheism before the new atheism. I tell people this. I say I was an atheist in the 1990s, and there were not a lot of other atheists around in the 1990s. In the U.S., would have been more common in the U.K. But I tell people like back then, atheists tended to not be very aggressive. They didn't seem to care a whole lot about what other people believe. They seemed to think it was good that religious people believed in religion, like that's going to help them. Like, hey, it's good. I don't believe in that stuff, but hey, it's good that you believe in that stuff. That's fine. And then it was like after Dawkins and Co. took over the train, that's when it...
Well, I would say really it was after 9/11 that in 9/11 was the thing which I think really inspired Dawkins. And that event gave atheists the excuse to become much more active than they had previously been. And you could certainly look at this and say, yeah, religion is not doing a good thing in this world here. Let's make a big case for it. So I think that people who were in their 20s and 30s at that time, looked at 9/11, looked at these new atheist books, and thought, yeah, maybe they're right. And I think that's what sort of built it up. And since then, I think that, actually it's moved more back to the sort of natural rhythm of things that, people do believe that there's something bigger than themselves that matters in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And, atheism can't explain that feeling. But Christianity and other religions do seem to talk to that more effectively than atheism, and I think that's why sort of atheism has peaked, and particularly the people, the Gen Zs and the millennials have been less influenced by the new atheists than those who grew up through 9/11.
Mm-hmm. And so my prediction as far as the future is concerned, now that basically everything they said was going to happen as a result of tons of people becoming atheists, none of it actually came true. It didn't seem to improve the world in the way they thought it would. My prediction is that lots of atheists who, I mean, you've always had atheists who don't care a whole lot about what other people believe, and so they get along really well with other people, and they're not like the aggressive in your face. You have to a bunch of religiotards with your sky daddy, that kind. So my idea is that the ones who became like that, the ones who became these aggressive, yelling sky daddy and stuff at you, I think some of those are going to go back to the way atheists sort of used to be. Back before they were like, everyone has to agree with us and we have to basically become an evangelical version of atheism where we try to convert the entire world. I think they're going to go back to just, all right, we're atheists, and if you believe something else, that's fine. I think some of the atheists are going to do that. I think you're also going to have some atheists, which I've already seen, who basically abandon atheism and just, this didn't work out, this didn't help, and I'm going to become something else now. I've seen a number of atheists leaving atheism and becoming Christians. And then I think a third group would be some of the young people who grew up during the heyday of the new atheism, where it was just really fun to go around saying, we're smart and everyone else is dumb, and we're the smart group and you're the dumb group. I think you're going to have some atheists who try to cling back to those glory days of the new atheism, just because I see those on YouTube, like they're struggling for relevance now in a world that's kind of losing interest in their claims. But anyway, I think you're going to have those three groups. But anyway, I think it's going to be better.
I mean, I think our study gives some interesting insights into what you just said, in that, we actually asked sort of two questions. First, the sort of Pew type research that you just said, what are you? A Christian, Muslim, Hindu, atheist, what have you? And then we asked them sort of essentially how religious they were. And, the bottom end of things we had, I'm an atheist, then I culturally associate with a religion, but I don't believe in God. And then we have, I'm not sure what I believe. And then we had, I associate with a religion, but I don't, but I have my own ideas of God, and the next thing was, I occasionally attend worship, but I have my own ideas of God. I worship regularly, but I don't follow the leadership of my religion in everything. And finally, I worship regularly and I follow the leadership of my religion in everything. And the thing which I found most strange was some of the people who said, ticked the box saying they were atheists in the first question, when it was compared to other religions, then ticked, I worship regularly and follow the authority of the leaders of my religion. And some of them, who said, it was an end. I'd say, I can't remember the actual percentage, but about 15% of atheists seem to actually have some belief in God, which may have been sort of unorthodox. And then some of the people who tick the box saying they were Christian, when asked, how, or indeed Muslim or whatever, they then ticked the box saying they're atheist in the next question, which is a bit puzzling. And I think that what it says to me, and when you look at also, we ask a question, how spiritual are you? Very, fairly, a little, not at all. A number of the atheists were saying they felt very spiritual or fairly spiritual. And so what I see is it's a sort of much more graded world that we live in, where actually everyone is struggling with these questions of sort of meaning and purpose and, morality and things like this. And, some of them, feel that, they can say that they're an atheist, but actually, beneath the surface, they have much more mixed feelings about this. And, others who might say that they are, religious, beneath that surface also have mixed feelings, because it is, it's a a genuine puzzle, as we saying that, every Sunday, this is the mystery of our faith. I mean, this is the way that it goes.
Here we have your feel good comment of the day. Said he looked way younger. That was, that was my reaction, because based on information that was that you guys were sending me and so on, I had pictured you kind of old, and then so when I was going to say, hey, back in my day, I remember before atheism, before the new atheism, and I was thinking, is this guy even old enough to remember that? But yeah, you're older than
no,
me.
I do have grey hair. There it is. It's coming out the bottom. Don't worry, I'm getting on.
All right, awesome. So, well, let's go ahead and take a look at this. And guys, I have links to Christopher's new book in the description box. Link to let me just make sure that is correct. I've got US. Okay, so I've got Amazon US and Amazon UK, depending on where you guys are at. So as he mentioned, that's that's his book, going through 4 atheist books and showing how they ultimately point to God. And now we're going to take a look at the study that he just referred to. And this is Belief in Britain. Belief in Britain, a look into the religious and spiritual landscape of the nation. And as Christopher pointed out, if you were to make predictions of what data you're going to find, what he was kind of saying we should expect to find is pretty much exactly what I would have expected to find, and it's just not what the evidence actually showed. So these are
just say first of all that Britain is very different from America in that we have an established church, the Church of England, which is sort of part of the Episcopalian tradition in America, and it's had a number of sort of abuse scandals and other sort of things which have probably had a harder knock on the religion than the churches in America. And furthermore,
interesting. So you're saying it's kind of a rougher reputation for the church in the UK.
I would say so. I mean that people. I mean the other thing about the sort of having an established church is that it doesn't sort of follow the market in quite the same way that if you are in an established church and you've got a sort of income off property and so forth, you don't necessarily need to be reaching out to your parishioners and making sure that they're fully engaged in the way that a lot of churches in America have to sort of work hard to understand, what the needs of their congregation is. And so overall, Britain is a more sort of disengaged country with religion than America. We're not at the level of Scandinavia, which is, probably the most sort of atheist part of the world, but the levels of sort of religious commitment are generally lower in Britain, and that's to some extent the nature of our church.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. There's my friend AP and I talk. Well, as I mentioned, so he left Islam. He from Turkey, left Islam back in the day, became an atheist for a while, but it was sort of a friendly atheist. He's sort of, hey, if you're not trying to kill me, then I don't care much what you believe and so on. then considered himself an agnostic for a while. Um, now has been praying and so on. And so what you have is a bunch of people online every time we go live are saying, hey, you need to join like my church. And so we've got Catholics and Protestants and Orthodox all saying, hey, jump on board here. And so we occasionally end up talking about the differences a little bit. But as you were mentioning, like, kind of an established church versus, something like the United States, where you've actually got like competition as far as where you're going to go to church and stuff. And if you don't like this church, there's another church right down the road. And so you have to sort of compete for things. And that can be good in that sense, that you really have to be paying attention to what people are interested in and so on. The downside is you can kind of go too far with that, and then it's just like, what do you want? You want a new Katy Perry song for our worship song? And okay, well, we'll go with that because that's what you guys want, so on. So and really, if you really go to an extreme, you end up with like every person is his own church. There is no official.
Yeah, I think that's one of these things that actually the survey bears out, and I think that's one of the big challenges churches are facing. It's right. I mean, the two things which I think are most important coming out of the survey was A, young people being more religious and more spiritual than older people, but B, the extent of the privatization of God. Mm-hmm. That it's increasingly less a shared concept, but one which each person is taking away their own view of it. And I think that ultimately that is very, it undermines what the whole point of religion is. But I don't know what the solution is, because this seems to be just the way the world is moving. We are feeling that, we as consumers should be making choices, and, if we can think up the God that we want to worship and so forth. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in the survey, as we'll see, I gave people a menu of different gods that they could have, and it was interesting to see what gods they wanted. So, shall we get back to survey? I interrupted you just when you were trying.
Oh no, that's good. Yeah, here we go. So, belief in Britain: a look at into the religious and spiritual landscape of the nation. And hey, that's you there. So, that's commissioned me. A poll. And by the way, everyone, there's a link to Christopher's new book. On Amazon, that's in the description box, but I also have a link to this study in the description box as well. So interesting stuff. You might want to check out the entire thing. But we'll go through some highlights here. So introduction: I commissioned the poll. 10,000 Brits representing the full breadth of religious and spiritual backgrounds across the country to help promote the Devil's Gospels, Finding God in 4 Great Atheist Books. All right, well, this is what I wanted to check out: the key findings. So the key findings here are young people are both more spiritual and more religious than older people. That would be the one that is most surprising to most people when they hear it. They also report becoming more spiritual and more religious in the past 5 years. That's interesting as well. But it's something I've kind of noticed as well, this shift over the past couple of years. But I didn't expect it to be this decisive as far as like polling. 2, atheism appears to be most popular among people in the 40s and 50s. Younger people seem less interested. Also surprising. You would have expected atheism to be most popular among the youngest people, and it's not. Interesting stuff. And then 3, nevertheless, Britons young and old are highly critical of religion and pessimistic about its outlook. So if you were just looking at 1 or 2, you might be thinking, Britain's in the middle of a revival and people are becoming Christian. And not so fast. All right, so what do you so we've got a ton of stuff in this study. What did you want to sort of zero in on?
Well, let's go to some of the charts. So scroll down to get to the first chart that we can sort of see, because
the charts are a good place.
More interesting for me. So that's just showing what the the way that people. I mean, that's a bit of a misleading chart because we got the
Yeah, that's where you
answer.
have the overlap where people are in multiple categories.
Yeah, we asked them two questions. One question of how much they engage with religion,
Hmm.
and we got sort of 30% non-believers and 40% uncommitted and 17% who worship regularly. The rest, were sort of prefer not to say types.
Yeah, and
But
I
then we
remember this
asked
whole.
the question about
No, I remember this whole. I'm spiritual but not religious.
yeah.
I remember that trend started. That was like 20 years ago, and you kept hearing it from actors and actresses on talk shows. So the actress would go on Oprah, and then they would say, "Oh, so what's tell us your religious beliefs?" And over again, they would say the exact same thing. They would all go, "Well, I'm not religious. I'm spiritual." And anyway, so
Yeah.
that was a trend that's been going on for a while.
So yeah, here you can see the sort of non-believers. 34%. That those are the sort of atheists. So that's the Gen X people. That's me and you, I think. Which is probably why we're both here today. I mean,
Yep.
if we weren't so sort of stirred up by the concept of atheism, we probably wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah,
But we
if we
probably
were Gen Z, we just wouldn't care apparently.
absolutely, it wouldn't cross our mind to be talking about this now. And similarly, if we were in our 80s, we probably wouldn't really see this as an interesting thing. And then we got the sort of religious bit at the bottom there saying Gen Z at 28%, and the boomers. It's interesting that they are the least
That's
religious
very interesting.
group in Britain. I wonder whether, if one were to sort of get into the weeds a bit, I mean, of America, that one might also find that this, the boomer generation, because of all these sort of personal freedoms and other, challenging sort of social norms and so forth, which they did in their youth, whether it didn't also have an effect on the way that they believed in America. And as you can see, that the spiritualism is, or how spiritual you feel, is something that definitely declines with age. So, I think we defined spiritual as, do you feel that there's something bigger than yourself that matters in the world and in life, and that's that. I mean, it's one of these things. One feels that they're just sort of slightly waiting for God, where they have that shaped hole in their heart that they're looking for. But at the same time, one has to accept there's some people who are just, completely unmoved. They are just materialists. They only believe in the sort of physical and material things that might matter. And those people are probably quite difficult to reach with religion. But anyway, let's scroll down and look at some other charts.
Oh, I just wanted people to really pay attention to those bottom two charts there. That's interesting. So, guys, you see as far as people who identify as religious, consider themselves religious. Look, the boomers, 11%, 11%. So, wow. And then, but Gen Z, so the young people, they're almost three times higher.
Yeah.
Which again, if I never seen this, if you'd asked me a couple weeks ago before I ever saw this, what to expect, I would have kind of expected the reverse of that.
Yeah.
I would expected the boomers to be around 28, 30% or something like that, and Gen Z to be like 11% or something. And then in the spiritual category, then all of a sudden you're talking well over half of Gen Z consider themselves spiritual and so on. So interesting stuff. All right, what do we have here?
This is what the sort of religions look like in the UK. I mean, as I said, we're a bit more of a atheist country than the US. I mean,
Mhm.
we've got 54% people identifying as Christian.
Yeah, we
We're
don't put up with
probably
atheists here.
we're probably a bit more of a Muslim country than the US. But I mean, I mean, the younger age group, they're actually more Muslims than the older age group, mainly because of immigration.
Yeah,
Um,
Islam in the U.S. tends to hover around 1%, because even factoring in immigration and conversions to Islam, those are offset by the number of people who leave Islam. So it basically remains steady right around 1%.
yeah, yeah. Now, I mean, we have quite a lot of people from South Asia moving to the UK, and that's I mean the sort of inheritance of our empire and so forth. So it's always been quite a higher number here. Um, this is something which I thought was, this most Christians don't follow the church's line on God. That this is just taking the Christians on their own, stripping out the atheists and other religions.
So these
And
are these would be the percentages of people who agree with this statement.
so what it is we asked people as I said, we had two questions. The first question is, what are you? Christian, atheist, Jew, Hindu, whatever. And the second question was, how much do you participate? And so some of those, of the people who said that they were Christians, those 54% who said they were Christians, 4% then said, well, actually, I'm an atheist. And then another 8% said, well, I said I'm a Christian, but only in a cultural sense. I celebrate the festivals, but I don't believe in God. And then, we have these sort of gradations of engagement. So, some of these people who say they're Christian, they celebrate the festivals, but they don't really know what they think. Others, don't participate, but they have their own understanding of God. And others participate in services, but have their own idea of God. And then, there are people who worship regularly, but don't accept every aspect. And actually, when it comes down to it, only 14% say that they worship regularly and accept the authority of the leaders of their faith. So this is what I mean about the sort of privatization of religion. That most people in the pews are not believing what the people in the pulpit are talking about, which is quite an interesting challenge. And I think that that's probably one of the big challenges for church going. Particularly, when you've got people who don't have they're not necessarily in that social network, and they then don't agree with what's coming out of the pulpit. It's quite difficult to sort of persuade them it's worthwhile to go along to church. But it's certainly an interesting situation, and I'm not sure what the solution is. Because it would be it seems to me that a large part of Christianity is this business of coming together to worship, and if actually everyone's sort of worshiping something slightly different. Mm-hmm. It makes it very difficult for churches and religious leaders to sort of work out how to play things. I guess we had a bit of a discussion about this when we sort of launched the report and the book, and one of the suggestions was that in future churches should be looking to bring together people on the basis of shared experience rather than shared dogma. And I don't know whether that is the answer. I mean, I don't know. Do you have any bright ideas? I mean, what would you do if you were a pastor and you were looking at this and you realized that only 14% of the people who were supposed to be following you actually did?
No, it is pretty rough. I think you need a mixture, right? I think it needs to be like, here are the things that we need to be firm and solid on, and that we don't change. And here are other things that we can
Mm-hmm.
that we can shift a little bit depending on people's
Yeah.
concerns and interests and so on. Because I mean, I mean, at the end of the day, different generations are different, and they have different experiences and different concerns and so on. But at the same time, there are still these, bedrock truths and so on that
Yeah.
that need to be part of every church and so on. So,
Okay, so let's scroll down a bit. I think there. I mean, I'm not sure which page it's on. I mean,
let's see. Look at that! Look at that! Hey,
the-
that's interesting. Look at that. So here's the 5-year change, generational split on how spirituality has changed over the past 5 years, and Gen Z up 26%, millennials up 22%, Gen X up 10%, and then like what's going on with the boomers and stuff? They're just not catching on. It's like are they just like set in their ways at this point or something?
I don't know. I suppose so. I mean, it may be they're just sort of disappointed with sort of life and despairing. I don't know. It is a bit worrying.
Get it together, boomers. Sit there moping and
And
crying
then
your entire life.
if you scroll up again, you'll see that the religion side of things is quite similar. This is we asked about 10 years here. It's the same, you know.
So younger people reported a net increase in how important religion is to them over the past 10 years. So in the past 10 years, Gen Z has gone up 16% talking about how important religion is to them. It's the old people that are the reverse of that, guys. Everyone, look, this should be kind of encouraging if you're worried about like the future of the world and the future of young people and so on. This is not what you would expect, and yet this is what the evidence actually shows.
Yeah.
So here you have your thoughts here on the side. Around 70% of Britons say that they are in some way spiritual. My guess is that the result would be the same if you had asked the question 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago.
I think that's the nature of people.
22% of Brits think there is the possibility of something bigger out there. 26% of Brits think sense of spirituality has increased in the last 5 years.
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, scroll down a bit. I mean, this. I mean, this. I find. So, I mean, this is sort of not so surprising. Just it's interesting that people are willing to. A lot more people are willing to listen to arguments in favor of religion than people who are unwilling. I mean, and again, it's the sort of boomers who are the least willing to listen to arguments in favor of religion.
Oh, that's very interesting. So, guys, look at this. This is 62% of Gen Z are willing to listen to arguments in favor of religion, which means if you've been trained all your life, I don't know exactly what the situation in the UK is, but in the US, it's very common to be told as you're growing up, don't bring up religion, you're just going to offend someone. And then people kind of get programmed that it's mean to bring up religious issues as you're growing up. You're just going to offend somebody. Where here looks like over half of Gen Z is willing to hear whatever case you've got. Like, hey, what's your argument? You got an argument for your position? Looks like over half would be willing to listen to that. So anyway, The point there, ladies and gentlemen, was one, if you've got people who are a good number of people who are actually willing to listen, that means you shouldn't be terrified and you shouldn't buy into the stuff of you're just going to offend somebody. There are apparently plenty of people out there who'd be willing to listen. But so that means one, you should have an argument for your position ready, and two, be ready to share it with people because it looks like you've got an audience out there that's ready to listen.
And except if 18% of boomers, they got closed ears. But anyway, shall we scroll down a bit further?
Yeah, so you can actually, when you're walking up to someone, you can figure out which group they're in, and if they're boomers, then get ready to be punched in the mouth, maybe because they're mad.
So if you just that's just what people do about their spiritualism. This is how different religions are compared. How we ask people what religion they identified with now and what they thought their parents followed, and it's sort of interesting to see, what the inheritance of different religions are. So Buddhism seems to be one of these things which is probably one of these sort of fashionable religions where uh, people take it up not having any sort of family tradition of it. The other thing is that it's interesting to look at the changing religion, which is that sort of mid-red point where you can see that there's actually, I mean, Buddhism is the biggest religion that people change to, followed by Judaism, followed by Hinduism, followed by Islam, followed by Christianity. And I think that reflects really how easygoing the religions are about interfaith marriages.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're born in one religion and then you marry into one of a Jewish husband or wife, or a Muslim husband or wife, you're much more likely to convert than you are if you are a Christian. I think let's scroll down and see what the sort of parents denomination. Oh yeah, we had a little bit on the denominations. So this. Actually, this doesn't really help very much. I thought the data doesn't give the change, but we did have some data on the change of which denominations are best at holding on to that.
So this is just among Christians. What is their
exactly.
Parents?
So,
Okay.
that's straightforward. Then we looked at the political parties. I mean, this is a sort of slightly funny thing that in the Green Party are both the most Muslim and the most atheist.
Interesting.
And that's a sort of strange thing in England. I think. I mean, I feel, and I don't know whether you see it too, but a lot of these sort of Green protesters, I feel they're expressing a sort of a religious sort of feeling when they sort of glue themselves to the roads or whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
And that explains why there's so many atheists. And I mean, in the UK, there was a big protest about Gaza, which ended up with the Green Party getting a lot of the Muslim vote, which is a slightly strange thing. But you can see, unlike America, we don't have this sort of political polarization within religion. So, the Labour Party, which is the sort of left-wing party, has got the most regular worshippers. And the Conservative Party has got the most sort of people who are identifying the occasional worship or non-worshippers, but identifying with religion as well as combined with worshippers. So we don't have that same sort of political split, and I think this sort of politics of religion is I think going to become a much bigger issue. I mean, that New York Times feature suggesting it was young men just wanting to identify as being conservative by becoming Christians. I would like to actually interrogate that a bit more. I mean, I would be surprised if actually young women weren't also attracted to religion in the same sort of way, but they just may express it in a different way. But I find this idea that religion and political affiliation should be sort of go hand in hand a little bit strange, because really religion should be, or Christianity aims to be a universal religion.
Yeah, so that was a New York Times article, but there was the Pew Research that it's based on. Yeah, I'm like you. I want to look at the Pew Research because it's hard to distinguish what when you've just got a reporter who's trying to make sense of something and isn't what the data actually show, but instead is just here's what I think it is. I think it's this, and might not be that at all.
Yeah. Anyway, let's just scroll down a bit further. I mean, some of these things that you just carry on going down, because I think that it'd be nice to get to the pages where we start. This is irrelevant to Americans. That's most of the world, and again, that's also a bit irrelevant. Here's some stuff on the sort of this atheism with fuzzy edges was one of the things that we talked about before. Some of these atheists are you can have this sort of hardcore who are atheists and not spiritual, and then you've got the atheists who are spiritual, and then you have the atheists who identify religion and don't believe, and then you have atheists who actually seem to go to a church and have some belief.
It's actually pretty important. This is actually like pretty important in terms of if you're talking to an atheist, keep in mind that it's not, there's not just one kind of atheist. They have within atheism, there are a bunch of different perspectives. And so if you're having a discussion with an atheist about his views on religion or spirituality, you might want to sort of have a couple of questions at the beginning to find out what kind of atheist you're dealing with. You might
Absolutely. I mean, I think it suggests to me that a sort of a more sort of confrontational approach is probably, not going to be as successful as one which is, trying to sort of feel for their spirituality, because essentially what one's saying is that more than half of atheists actually feel spiritual in some way. And if one can sort of somehow touch that and, turn it in a productive direction, that might be the most successful thing, rather than, you're wrong, I'm right type direct confrontation.
Mm-hmm. And here we have very interesting.
Yeah, this is the atheism peaking among this 45 to 64-year-olds.
So atheism peaked, ladies and gentlemen. It peaked with old people, and now it looks like it's on the decline. But still, you're almost. It looks like you're about twice as likely to identify as an atheist if you're older than if you're younger. So 13% versus 25%.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, I think that it's something which just suddenly made me feel my age when I saw this, and I'm sure that you feel the same, as you're in the lower bracket of the 25, and I'm in the upper bracket of the 25. That it's our generation which were most impacted by this sort of new atheism.
That's funny. That's funny though, because you kind of like people our age who want to sit back and shake our fists at the young people and be like, these young people are ruining everything. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting stuff. 13%, guys. 13%. 18 to 24 years. And now this looks interesting.
Is relevant for America. That's actually very interesting. Now, that graph there. Now, one of the things which I think is unfortunately true is that it isn't what religions believe that turn people away. It's what they do that turn people away. And it's if you look at this graph, we got number one deterrent from religion. People say religious violence. 9/11. All this stuff going on in Gaza and so forth. One can understand why religious violence is a big turnoff. The number two, the way religions behave more generally. I mean, that's the fault of the way that these sort of institutional churches and other religions have sort of used the power or abused the power of religion or abused the power of faith. And I think there does need to be a bit of a sort of mea culpa on that. And then, then we go sort of down, the next big deterrent is, suffering and injustice. I mean, I'd say that that's the problem of evil. How does a good God let bad things happen? And, that is a perennial objection, and you can't really put that at the door of the religions, but, rather it's one of these sort of philosophical hurdles that people have got to get over. Skepticism, just sort of 23% said skepticism. Disillusionment, again, I'd say is a problem for the religion not living up to expectations, rather than God being unbelievable or whatever. Moral disagreements, political suppression, media representation. All those things are not that, they're not really the reason why one has a sort of an apologetics YouTube channel like this. The two, the thing which I think is most interesting is that they're at the bottom. The arguments.
Yeah, that's what I found most interesting.
The biggest, they're the least, the smallest reason why people are deterred from religion.
Yeah, let me just share a little something with you. I've mentioned it during live streams before, but this is like this was maybe it was maybe 2012, sometime around there. But I had a debate with an atheist at Columbia University, and it was about I think it was about the moral argument. But so we had the debate, and then afterwards, I was hanging out with probably around six or seven Asian atheists. So it was just me. It was just me and, seven or eight, whatever it was, six, seven, eight, somewhere in there, atheists afterwards. And so we're having dinner and having discussions. And I kept offering them arguments, and then they would respond to the arguments and so on. And finally, I gave an argument they didn't know how to respond to, and then I'm looking at one of the atheists and I go, "So what do you think?" And he goes, "Well, to be honest, I don't care if it's true. I just care that it's bad." And I thought, and that was totally foreign idea to me, right? Like, I don't believe in Islam. If Islam were true, I would want to know it. It really, really matters whether something is true. So to hear this young guy say, it doesn't matter if it's true. All that matters is it's bad. I was like, whoa, this has been a big change, because that is not my thinking at all. But then I kind of went down the line. I asked all the rest the same thing, and they all. I said, "Do you agree with him?" And every last one of them agreed with him. So they all agreed. The real issue is not whether this stuff is true. The real issue is whether this stuff is bad.
Yeah, and I
So
think that is a bit of a wake up call. One needs to make sure that one is living up to, as a Christian, one's living up to the ideals of Jesus Christ.
mhm.
That as Nietzsche himself said, there was only one Christian, and he died on the cross. And we have really struggled to sort of live up to that ideal ever since. And I think that it becomes much more difficult when you start forming churches and have this whole sort of religious organization which sort of develops power and tries to sort of use its power in different ways and so forth. And it becomes sort of quite a long way from what what Jesus would have expected. I mean, we often in our Sunday school sort of imagine what would happen if Jesus turned up and saw our church, and one feels it would be absolutely horrified.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so right after I heard that, this was a couple of weeks later, and I was at a Christian philosophy conference, and Paul Copan was there, and he was giving a presentation about the church's impact on the world and how the church actually spread literacy. Wherever Christian missionaries went, literacy shot up, women's rights shot up. A view of human rights eventually emerged, and so on. He was talking about all these impacts and so on. And during the Q&A, I raised my hand and I explained what I just heard from the young atheist, and I said, the stuff that you're sharing right now, based on what I'm seeing from young people, the stuff you're sharing may actually be more important than like giving a cosmological argument or a design argument or any sort of argument.
Absolutely.
It's like, hey, what have you done for the world? It seems like it might actually be more important.
Absolutely. So let's scroll down. I think there's a couple of other things which I think are interesting.
Yeah, I know there's
this is a bit more UK oriented. I wouldn't.
Although yeah, it'll be different numbers and sort of different scandals that are emphasized, but still common in the U.S. The big one was with the Catholic Church years ago,
Yeah.
and things like that. But it's common to hear like smaller things, like in other words, something that happened at a person's particular church that they didn't like, and then so they stopped going to church because of that one thing that happened.
Yeah. This whole sort of modernizing thing, that's sort of not I wouldn't say a sort of huge question. just what they should do. Again, I don't think that's a big deal. I'm just trying to remember when you scroll on down. I think
well, this I think is interesting because going back to what you're saying, that if people are more interested in like the impact and what you're doing, whether it's good or bad, than they are in like arguments for this and that, then kind of is relevant to, okay, what would you like to see people doing? What would you like to see the church doing, and so on? And then, well, helping more people in the local community, tackling abuse claims head on, and so on, going to schools and engaging with young people, opening doors to places of worship, directly engaging with skeptical members, using social media. I got that one down. Engage with science, and utilizing influencers who are religious. It's just interesting because we're familiar with all these things, but the priority here, like what's at the actual top of the list. Anyway, interesting stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, if you can scroll down to page 22 or 23, I think that's where you'll find the next. Yeah, this one. What we want from God. This is interesting. So scroll down here. These top arguments. We ask people, what do you think are the strongest arguments against belief? And then we also ask them what they felt were the strongest arguments in favor of belief. And you can see the answers there. Obviously the top one is, well, there's no evidence for God, and then this problem of evil is sort of number 2 at 30%. Well, no, it's actually number 3. Religion, sorry, number 2 is not really an argument against God. It's an argument against the way that religions behave. Number 3 there is the problem of evil, which I'm sure you've rehearsed a million times on your show. This is something which the young people in my Sunday school had the biggest difficulty with, actually. And it shows that in the survey, the Gen Z people were more likely to put this religion must be a product of culture as their top argument against God. And what that is the thing, I'm only Christian because I'm born in a Christian family. If I was born in Pakistan, I would have been brought up a Muslim. So that's an accident of birth, and therefore just so you know,
that was exactly my argument when I was an atheist. That was the big one for me. What you're telling me to believe in the Bible? Why are you telling me that? Because you're born in the United States. If we'd been born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be telling me about the Quran. If you've been born in India, you'd be telling me about that. If you've been born in China, you'd be telling me something different. So why should I take any of this seriously?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean that's the biggest argument, hurdle for young people. Then we have this top arguments for belief, and I think this top one here, we have a yearning to connect with something bigger than ourselves. Again, that's not really an argument. It's a sort of emotional feeling, and it's something that we just seem to possess. But that was true across all age groups, and I personally I think that is ultimately what gets people into religion, rather than any, as you say, cosmological argument or whatever. Then we have the I suppose Pascal's wager, which I have to say I've always felt is completely unconvincing, but that argument of Pascal's wager, if there's a life of God after death, believing God makes sense. That argument was most popular among the oldest generations, which is a bit unfortunate. Then there's one feels there is this meaning of life, and religion or God has to be the best explanation of it, or the creation. And it's interesting. What one might say, sort of charismatic view. If you have direct experience of God, that and then God exists. That's obviously a bit more of a minority thing, because it only affects a relative minority of people. But I think in terms of engaging with people, this is quite a good guide to the kind of arguments that work and don't work.
It also makes sense of some of the some of the other findings. So if you look at top arguments against belief, well, there's no evidence of God's existence. Okay, so Judaism, Christianity, Islam. If you have a bunch of people who don't believe there's any evidence for your God, well, your God is pretty foundational to your religion, and so you got a problem with your religion in general if people think there's no evidence of God. And then religions are the cause of so much suffering. There, it's actually religions are a problem. Whereas if you look at the other side, we have a yearning to connect with something bigger, something like that. Well, there that kind of makes sense of people going in the direction of spiritual, but not necessarily religious. It's you've got this yearning, you need something bigger, so you go in the spiritual direction, but you don't believe there's evidence for God's existence, and you believe that religions are harmful. And so, what would you do? What would you do? You'd say, okay, I'm spiritual, but not interested in signing on to a religion.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, as I say, those are what we asked two separate questions. What is the top arguments for, and what are the top arguments against? Mm-hmm. Now, the next question, I think, is probably the last one, which is sort of worth talking about. Is what people want from God. This is, I guess, thinking of God as some sort of thing you might pick up at a sort of buffet counter in a hotel or in a supermarket. It's a fairly irreligious question to ask of people, but I thought, slightly subversive way, it was interesting to see what people
say.
Like
if you're going to Frankenstein a god to believe in, what parts would you want to include in there?
Yeah, exactly, and it's interesting. So this we are, obviously we asked to atheists as well as Muslims, Hindus, what have you, and it's interesting that top one, a comforting God, was top for everyone. It wasn't like there were, atheists want that as much as Muslims and what have you, and Christians. And, a God of creation who made the world, that's, I guess, most popular actually among Muslims, which I'm slightly surprised with. This God of love is, more popular among Christians, which is, what one ought to expect. I mean, a God of truth, again, that's sort of pretty universal. Then, one can sort of see these sort of different things. God of nature looks after the environment. I mean, this sort of environmentalism and Christianity is an interesting challenge because, it wasn't a problem in Jesus' day, but it is now, and it's a little bit awkward working out, what the biblical guidance on that is. Then you've got the this, I suppose, what do they call it? The ground of our being. This idea that the God supports the existence of everything. I mean, that's a bit more intellectual. And it's, I guess, the sort of God that one ends up sort of talking about when one's getting quite abstract in terms of the nature of God. The God of miracles is a bit further down, and then a human God, obviously that's part of the unique nature of Christianity, is that God came to earth as a human. But still that's something which it isn't just Christians who like that idea. God of the afterlife. I was quite surprised that the afterlife is actually bottom of the shopping
way
list,
down the line, way down the list of priorities.
Yeah. And I wonder if you'd asked the same question sort of 200 years ago, whether the afterlife thing would have been a bigger, would have been much higher up the whole thing. And then, the personal God who sort of talks directly. We had just for space purposes, we had to sort of cut off a few of the things which were really at the bottom. And, we put in something about a sort of deist type God, one who, exists but doesn't do anything. That was extremely unpopular. We put in a sort of prosperity gospel type God who, would just provide you with money if you worshipped him, and that was also extremely unpopular. We put in a sort of a tribal god who would just look after my people, and that was also extremely unpopular. So it's interesting that actually the things which you could say relate to a Christian God are actually universally sort of popular, even with people outside Christianity.
Mm-hmm. And it's I've mentioned things where, if you're talking to someone, if you're talking to an atheist and there are different kinds of atheists based on the data, then you might want to kind of figure out what kind of atheist you're talking about. You could be talking to an angry atheist, you could be talking to a more friendly atheist, you could be talking to an atheist who considers himself spiritual, and so on. But also for atheists, it's especially the new atheists. Just over the years, it was just, oh, you guys just believe in your God of heaven or hell to feel better about things and so on. It's like, well, it looks like that's not even a issue in most people's minds here, as far as just like God of the afterlife. Who,
yeah,
interesting. Oh, interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think that's I think the best bits of the report. But anyway, no, it's been an interesting conversation.
Yeah, guys, and so there's there's a link to the book and to that entire study there. So if you want to go through it, there's more information in there, and there's more. But that's good to. There's good stuff in there to learn and share, both just for understanding the culture that we're in right now, but also surprising stuff, ladies and gentlemen, surprising stuff, and should be some. I don't know, whatever your perspective on things happens to be, there are some unexpected findings in there, and good stuff to pay attention to.
And if you enjoy this whole sort of wrestling with atheists, then do look out for the book, the Devil's Gospels, Finding God in 4 Great Atheist Books, because that's really a different approach to. Engaging with atheism and trying to get people to understand the possibilities of God.
All right, let's take a couple of super chats here before we close out. These are people who posted questions. Some of them will be relevant, some will not. I watched a video by Testify today and realized that Islam is a sinking ship and it is taking Muslims down with it. Who would abandon ship? I haven't seen that video from Testify, so. I would have to see. But you do have something that they're calling the avalanche of apostasy.
What I'd say, I travel quite a lot in the Middle East. I've been to Saudi Arabia, a couple of times this year already, and I'll be going there in a couple of months' time and so forth. And last time I was there, it was sort of quite interesting to talk about. We were talking about women wearing hijab, and how we were in the museum in Jeddah where they had all sorts of costumes from people earlier ages in Saudi Arabia, and they're all colourful, and they weren't all coloured up. And I asked them about this, and they said, "Oh, yes, we did used to wear clothes like that, but then there was the Great Awakening." And they talked about this sort of idea of the Great Awakening happening in the sort of really from the sort of 1970s, and leading to obviously the siege of Mecca and the whole handing over of the sort of, I suppose, a lot of power to the religious establishment. And, one feels now that is very much in the past. But in Europe, it's probably a bit different. One feels that young people in Europe are probably experiencing the Great Awakening. And, it's past, and certainly, I've traveled in Iran as well, and you can see that the sort of that Great Awakening in Iran has probably also tailed off.
And one of the things over the past couple decades is that Islam historically has very low apostasy rates. And then as of I think the study was 4 or 5 years ago, but there was a study showing 24% of young Muslims were leaving Islam. But it was that was over a period of like 15 or 20 years, had gone from basically zero to like around 24%. And you had a bunch of Muslim speakers who were getting really, really concerned about that. It's like along the lines of, wait a minute, if we went from close to 0% to 24% in a decade and a half, we really need to do something.
I think what I'd say is that if you probably look at the data, you'd find that in the Arab world, there has been a decline. But in the diaspora, and it's certainly true in the data we had, that young Muslims are more committed than their parents. But that's again, it's a sort of unusual situation. I.e., you have people coming over from their parents' generation came over from Pakistan or wherever it might be. The parents basically didn't really participate in religion, and then the younger generation have become much more interested in it because it becomes part of their way of expressing their cultural identity. And so I think you've got to see that this is religion is a complex sort of puzzle which has sort of ups and downs all over the world.
Yeah, and I'd be wondering about the impact of the study you just did, and what it's kind of revealing, in the sense that, so you had among young people, the apostasy rate shot up, but it was also that shot up during the heyday of the new atheism, and so you might be seeing in the community of young Muslims basically a similar reversal, in the sense that, okay, a lot of young people tried atheism and it didn't take us in the direction we thought it was going. So you know what? We're getting away from that. And we're going back to our religion.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Atheism was like a severe immunological disorder to Western Europe that weakened it. Now it's so weak that the Islamic virus is completely destroying it. I think an exodus of European Christians to the USA might happen. So this is fun.
Oh dear.
Well, this actually ties in with stuff that like Richard Dawkins was saying. Richard Dawkins said years ago, he says, I have mixed feelings about the decline of Christianity because I think it may have been a bulwark against something worse. And so,
yeah, I mean, what I'd say is that it was certainly Richard Dawkins does like the idea of memes, and he thinks of religion as a meme, and I guess I think of atheism as a meme. And in my book I talk about this whole spread of the sort of atheist meme versus the sort of the Christian meme, and whereas Richard Dawkins feels that the atheist meme is ultimately sort of bound to succeed because it's got science and reason on its side and so forth. I think that ultimately what matters is goodness. And if Christianity and goodness go together in the way that they're supposed, it's an incredibly powerful meme. I mean, when you say that the problem has really been that Christianity and sort of abuses has been a very sort of powerful meme in the other direction, and I think we will get over that.
Let's see. Crazy how a mere 20% loss in faith leads to modern day insanity. We have Nick here says, I do not believe in God, but atheism is turbo cringe. And then Nick says, why? And he says, but because non-Christian countries are utter failures. So this is the guy who doesn't believe in God saying, I like countries that do better. Av says, where is the Christian outrage to the values that Trump and his people display? Where is the accountability and the defense of the Christian values? But I'm not sure you've understood what's going on, but is
Yeah, no, I have. I mean, I think the thing which I found most difficult actually was that whole Ordo Amoris thing from Vance, which I thought was deeply unchristian. I think that, the thing which is revolutionary about Christianity is the idea of universality and universal love. And when you start saying that there is an order in which you should love people, I don't care what Catholic theologian cooked it up, but sure as hell Jesus didn't. It was, he was about, loving your neighbor and your neighbor, and loving your enemy, and that completely exhaustive love for everyone that really has no place in that kind of sort of Christian nationalism where one's saying, well, our love only extends to the borders of the United States, and if there are people suffering elsewhere, we don't care. We're going to close down USAID. We're going to put these, it seems to be, as I say, a part of the abuse of Christianity. And I think that this is something which I worry about, even though I am one of these sort of infected Europeans who's been sort of undermined by atheism or whatever the previous question was. I think that American Christianity is, unless it keeps with the, keeps Jesus Christ first and his values as being the central part of what being a Christian is about, then I think it is very vulnerable to being sort of pushed aside, by politics, and that is something I think that people do need to worry about.
Yeah, and as far as I can tell, the big thing to be concerned about in the U.S. is basically when you have you have things going too far in one direction, the reaction that comes is proportionate to that. So when you have for years people getting fed up about certain things, I can't believe you're doing this, I can't believe the government's doing that, I can't believe that the government has gone completely insane, then the reaction that eventually comes to that is it goes further than people would like in the other direction.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a real danger that, let's say, for example, inflation goes to 10% in America, and Trump becomes completely discredited, and then the whole sort of conservative movement starts to fall apart. It would be a horrendous thing if that had an effect on the church. That would be just so wrong. That one needs to be able to sort of keep this, as I say, it's ultimately it's about goodness, and it's not about which party you're with and all that sort of thing. And getting too tightly tied to one party is a very dangerous thing. And I think that this, I'd be interested to see in America whether there is generational issues in terms of people whose parents are very conservative, and they're younger people feeling that they are more socially liberal than their parents, and deciding that they don't want to be a Christian simply because they don't necessarily identify with their parents' politics. And that would be a real tragedy. It has to be universal.
And final question here. Thoughts on Eric Steinhardt atheism? Don't know enough about Eric Steinhardt I know he's a professor, a philosophy professor, but not terribly familiar, Grace.
No, me neither.
All right, so I guess that about wraps it up. So again, everyone, link to the book in the description, and link to the study that we went through. But also, Christopher, any final thoughts on anything, or any thoughts you want to?
No, it's just been great talking to you. I really enjoyed it, and thanks for inviting me on.
All right, guys. And again, I also put in a link to that New York Times article about America, and we'll all want to be checking out what the Pew Research shows, because anyway, these are interesting times, ladies and gentlemen, and some things are happening that you might not have expected, but we need to cover them. And I don't know. These could be some fun times ahead, ladies and gentlemen. Could be fun times ahead. All right, thank you, Christopher, for joining us, and we look forward to checking out your stuff.
Sure.
All right, catch y'all next time.